Imagine waking up one morning and you discover that every single struggle in your life, every physical problem, maybe moments of confusion, pain, it all comes down to one kind of horrifying truth. Decisions made long before you were even born. Your parents, maybe grandparents, were obsessed with keeping the bloodline pure. And because of that, you're the one condemned to a life of suffering. Your family tree isn't this healthy branching thing. It's more like, well, one account called it a twisted vine choking itself in its own coils.
Yeah.
And this isn't some fantasy novel plot. This was the harsh reality for so many women throughout history.
And the echoes of that nightmare, tragically, well, they actually helped us understand genetics today.
Right. So our mission here is to dig into the sources you've gathered, the history, the personal stories, the science behind it all. We want to get a real sense of the human cost, valuing lineage over actual well-being, and how their suffering, documented so meticulously, ended up centuries later contributing to scientific breakthroughs. It's quite a paradox. Okay, so let's start with this core belief. For centuries, European royals genuinely thought they had blue blood, that their right to rule came directly from God. It wasn't just symbolic, was it?
No, not at all. It was fundamental to their power structure. And that belief directly led to a strategy. Marrying within the family wasn't just preferred, it became, well, the main way to keep power, wealth, and land consolidated. By the 1500s, it was so common that these royal families across Europe were essentially, like you said, this huge interconnected web. Cousins marrying cousins, uncles marrying nieces. It was almost standard practice.
A closed system designed to keep everything locked in.
Exactly. Keep it all in the family.
And the Habsburgs of Austria and Spain, they're probably the most, well, infamous example of this dedication to self-preservation, which ultimately became self-destruction. You know their unofficial motto, let others wage wars, you happy Austria, marry.
Right, but the irony is just crushing, isn't it? These marriages weren't happy unions. They were, as you put it, calculated genetic disasters. We can see that clearly now.
Okay, let's focus on one story. We go to Vienna, 1634. Maria Anna of Austria is born, and she arrives with what some call the Habsburg curse already written in her genes, a direct result of generations of this intense inbreeding. And her life was difficult from the very beginning. Sources say she struggled to walk, her spine was curved, forcing her into this hunched posture. Even breathing was hard. And that jaw, the Habsburg jaw, wasn't just a cosmetic thing. It made eating solid food incredibly difficult, an exhausting ordeal. Servants had to cut her food into tiny, tiny pieces.
Yeah, the physical issues are undeniable. But imagine the psychological side. Growing up surrounded by portraits of her ancestors and seeing her own features, her own deformities reflected back at her, the same jaw, the same posture. She must have realized with this terrible clarity that she wasn't unique in her suffering. She was just the latest victim in this long line.
And the doctors, did they tell her?
No, not directly. They whispered about the Habsburg curse, sure. But to her face, it was always mysterious ailments or, God's will. They never acknowledged the cause.
But she wasn't just defined by her physical limitations, was she?
Not at all. Sources mention her sharp mind. It seems like reading was her escape, her way to find some intellectual freedom in a body that was essentially failing her. Books offered a world beyond lineage.
That's something, at least.
It is. But reality was harsh. When it came to marriage, she was basically a case study. Potential suitors, often her own cousins, would come, see her condition, and negotiations would just fall apart. They recoiled. She died young, only 32. Her body just gave out from the cumulative genetic damage. The official cause listed various things, but the root cause. Generations prioritizing power over health, purity over, well, basic compassion.
And her story isn't isolated. You mentioned Margaret Theresa of Spain, similar struggles.
Very similar. Born just a few decades later, another product of an uncle-niece marriage. We see hints of the same issues in her portraits by Velázquez, the jaw, maybe developmental delays. Died even younger, at 21, same pattern.
Okay, so physical deformities are one tragic outcome, but what about when the damage goes deeper, affecting the mind, the spirit, and then that vulnerability gets exploited? That brings us to Joanna of Castile, Juana la Loca. Joanna the Mad, born 1479. Her parents, the famous Ferdinand and Isabella, were cousins, so the genetic stage was already set.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating, or rather tragic, about Joanna is how her so-called madness seems to really ignite after her marriage. Her husband, Philip the Handsome, well, he wasn't exactly kind. Unfaithful, cold, manipulative. Joanna's love for him was intense, obsessive even, and contemporaries jumped on that, labeled it madness. But looking back, many historians now think, well, maybe it was a somewhat understandable reaction. A brilliant woman, trapped, humiliated constantly, likely battling severe depression made worse by her genes.
And her grief when Philip died suddenly, it was extreme. Refusing to bury him, traveling with the coffin, opening it. It's horrifying to imagine.
It is horrifying. But maybe it also speaks to something else, her profound isolation. Maybe that was the only connection she felt she had left in a world that treated her like a political piece on a board.
And then her own family used this against her.
Absolutely. First her father, Ferdinand, then her son, Charles V. They used her supposed madness to lock her away. For 46 years. Think about that.
46 years. In what kind of conditions?
Deplorable. Dark rooms, cold, barely enough food, denied hygiene. Reports say she'd tear her clothes, scream for hours. It raises that crucial question, was she truly mad in the way they meant? Or driven to extreme behavior by depression, anxiety, probably PTSD, all amplified by decades of abuse and isolation?
And the genetics.
Oh, the genetic link is there. Her family history shows patterns of mental illness, depression, anxiety, things we know are more common and severe with inbreeding. It affected relatives before and after her.
So she died in 1555, still a prisoner, labeled mad, basically erased.
Essentially, yes. Written off as an inconvenient madwoman, a victim not just of her potential genetic predispositions, but of a system that prioritized politics above all else.
And you mentioned echoes in others, like Anna of Austria in France.
Right. Another uncle-niece marriage product. She battled severe anxiety, depression, huge struggles with fertility blamed entirely on her, leading to agoraphobia. Another woman psychologically trapped by her inheritance and circumstances.
These individual stories are just devastating. But they're part of this bigger generational train wreck, aren't they? Especially with the Spanish Habsburgs later on, culminating in Charles II.
Charles II, he's really the endpoint, the ultimate catastrophe of this whole system. 16 generations of intense inbreeding. He was, scientifically speaking, so inbred that his genetic coefficient, that measure of shared ancestry, was higher than that of children born to brother-sister pairs. It's almost unbelievable. He couldn't have children, had epilepsy, likely intellectual disabilities, endless physical problems, immune issues, a living symbol of genetic collapse.
And the women around him, his sisters, cousins, the infantas.
They suffered terribly too. Maria Margarita, one source mentions, had severe developmental delays. Didn't speak clearly until she was 7, trouble walking, maybe signs of autism spectrum disorders. Her sister, Marie Theresa, had epilepsy, the falling sickness, breathing problems, the jaw, a curved spine. It's a grim list.
The palace must have been.
More like a hospital, honestly. The Alcazar in Madrid back then. Records show it was filled with physicians constantly attending to these royal children, all suffering from different versions of the same genetic disaster. Epilepsy, deformities, immune failure, psychiatric issues. It's all there in the records. Reads like a medical text on inbreeding.
And the cruelty of it. Despite being so obviously unwell, they were still expected to marry and have children.
That was their primary royal function, yes. Medical reports about their health were sent around Europe, not out of, concern, but to assess their value, their potential value as breeding stock. It's chilling.
I can't even imagine the psychological toll.
It must have been immense, living in constant fear of pregnancy, knowing each time you conceive, you risk your own life, and you'll likely bring another suffering child into the world. Letters between these women talk about miscarriages, infant deaths, heartbreaking stuff. Many developed severe anxiety, depression, PTSD. And they often blamed themselves, thinking they were somehow flawed, because of course they didn't understand the genetics back then.
So all these stories, this immense suffering, it all points back to the underlying biology. Let's unpack the science a bit. What exactly is inbreeding depression?
Right. So in simple terms, inbreeding depression is basically the reduction in biological fitness, health, survival, fertility in a population, because closely related individuals keep reproducing. See, in diverse populations, we all carry some harmful recessive genes, but they're usually masked by a healthy dominant gene from the other parent. But when you have generations of, say, cousins marrying cousins,
the chances of inheriting 2 copies of the same harmful genes skyrocket.
Exactly. Those harmful genes are no longer masked. They get expressed. And that leads to a much higher rate of genetic disorders, lower fertility, weaker immune systems, you name it.
And the Habsburg jaw is the classic visible example of that accumulation.
It's the most iconic, for sure.
Yeah.
Mandibular prognathism, technically. It just got more and more pronounced down the line.
But it wasn't just the jaw.
No, not at all. That was just the surface. Modern genetic analysis, using those same historical records, points to higher rates of epilepsy, intellectual disabilities, anxiety, depression, immune problems, even autoimmune disorders. And the fertility issues we talked about, miscarriages, infant deaths, that was the almost inevitable outcome of this accumulating genetic damage.
So going back to Joanna, or even Marie Antoinette, her struggles weren't just the pressures of court life.
Likely not just that. Marie Antoinette came from a slightly less inbred Habsburg branch, but she still carried markers, like the jawline. Her documented issues, severe menstrual problems, miscarriages, maybe hormonal imbalances contributing to her anxiety and depression. It's very plausible that these were genetic predispositions, sort of like a vulnerability that were then triggered and amplified by the incredible stress of her life, especially during the Revolution. The impossible pressures of royalty acted as a trigger for underlying genetic vulnerability.
It makes you wonder, with all this suffering, all this visible evidence, why did the system keep going for so long? Why did they stop?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the answer is complex, tied up in politics and society. Royal courts knew about the health problems. The records were there. But arranging these marriages offered huge political advantages: alliances, territory, power consolidation. Those